The two great unanswered questions of human life are what are we and where are we? And it is these fundamental mysteries which created a need in the human animal to mythologise. Our sense of where we are, even at the local level, is a stable point in our psyche, both as the individual and as the group identity. Place for us is important, and our ideas of place are something that we create, and these creations change over time as culture changes. In indigenous communities, many believe that it is in the act of naming that our reality is created. Only when the human beings name the flora, fauna and places do they come into being. But we are now so far removed from our relationship with the land that we have become trapped in mythologies of the mindscape. In this conversation with Simon Roper, we will be considering some of the ideas behind the mythologization of place names. Welcome to Mythologies by Jack Adams. Welcome to a space where imagination is expanded by understanding our mythologies. I spent some time with someone called Professor Gracelyn Smallwood, who's an indigenous academic, and she was fabulous towards me. She really taught me a hell of a lot of stuff. But she was saying how once you take indigenous people away from their traditional land, there's absolutely clear evidence of mental illness. I can completely understand, because if you psychologically embed yourself within an idea that a traditional land area, that you are it and it is you, if you remove yourself from that, then the natural consequence is going to be stress, anxiety, depression, all these mental illnesses. And when she was talking to me about this, I remembered then when I'm flying back into Heathrow, whenever I've been out doing my little researches and what have you, and because I'm a Londoner, whenever I fly back in, I get this feeling of, I'm home.
Yeah.
It's the layer of what you were talking about. We layer these emotional experiences onto a place. And so the name of a place doesn't just carry that it's a Turtle Mountain, but it also carries the memory of what I did on Turtle Mountain.
Absolutely.
Where Turtle Mountain was in my life. Mm. So within these place names, there's a whole load of other memories that are compounded into the place name.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both individually, but also as groups, it can happen.
How do you mean?
Dunkirk.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
You know, no, you don't have to have been to Dunkirk to be an English person, to have an immediate emotional resonance that's kicking through, because I know that's just one off the top of my head. Another one, Stonehenge.
That's true. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's not just that we name places, and we name places maybe as a feature or as is all people that live there, but it's also that we then load into that a whole load of other motive responses, which are about both the personal and the group, and that's the mythology of place.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's exactly what we're talking about with mythologies. That's the mythology of place.
And the kind of interactions between how a person who lives there might view it and how they might associate with the name, as opposed to somebody who lives 20 miles away and hasn't been there but is vaguely aware of it, and then somebody who's never heard it before and just hears the name for the first time. It's going to interact with everybody on a slightly different level.
And being homesick is being away from the place that you've layered the most emotional relevance into.
That's right. That's a very good way of putting it.
So that's why you always love to go back to the place you grew up as a child, because it's got a huge resonance that's happening within you psychologically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Now, here's the thing. If we haven't got a lot of written evidence about Saxon life and Saxon mythologies, we've got artifacts, but even then it's relatively poor, isn't it? Because a lot of their stuff's wood, isn't it? It's not.
Yeah.
So we've got the problem with the deterioration within the landscape. So Saxon archaeology is not what we would call rich, other than the apparent hoard here and there.
Yeah.
And even then, I would argue that the hoard is about the power structure. It's not necessarily about the lives
the
of the
everyday
people.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree.
So the trying to find access into some sort of understanding of Saxon mythologies and Saxon belief systems and how they work. Is it possible, because we know that culture, this is how I say we know, this is what I believe, culture is the human interface with environment. And when I say environment, I don't just mean landscape, I also mean intellectual environment, emotional environment. I mean it as a holistic sense, that the environment within which you find your consciousness, that is the interface you have with that is what we call culture.
I absolutely agree with that.
Right, so you don't build igloos in the middle of Hammersmith.
That's true.
It's culturally inappropriate and it doesn't work within that landscape. So if we know that the environment produces the culture and the mythologies are part of that culture, is it possible to look back and to reverse engineer to some sense with reasonable intellectual care, let's say that, but to look at the landscape and to look at how they're describing the landscape and see whether we can find clues about how the people were mythologizing their place?
I think it's certainly, I think anyway, possible to find clues. I think the idea of going back and triangulating is a bit trickier.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Although you could certainly see, for example, that there's a higher frequency of clearings, forest clearings, like which the Anglo-Saxon word lach is often attached to, that have God's names prefixing them. So it's possible that maybe forest clearings was something that was significant in that sense to people, and stuff like that, where you often find certain themes connected to certain other themes in place names. But it's very hard, as you say. I think a lot of the time, without more direct evidence, the most we can do, if I was being a bit more nihilistic about it, is to take ethnographic examples, think this is the range of possibilities that humans can kind of extrapolate from a landscape. So that's the kind of thing people might have been doing, but of course you can't then say they were doing what this other group, better recorded group, were doing or anything like that. You can't even necessarily project Scandinavian things which are better recorded onto them, because of course there's hundreds of years time gap between those two diverging.
And also we must remember the environments are different.
That's true, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which is possibly why a lot of Scandinavians settled in the UK, because the land was slightly better and it was slightly differently arranged. I think there's something to be said, if not necessarily in toponymy, in the linguistics of how words were loaned into the language. So, for example, in Northern England, you can look at the and I think people have tried to look at the distribution of Old Norse loanwords into Northern dialects to try and see, well, look at the kinds of words that are being loaned in. So words for specific types of livestock. So you had very specific terms for different stages in the sheep life cycle and things like that, and agricultural tools and stuff, which were loaned in from Old Norse, which would suggest that rather than Norman French later on, which loaned in a lot of terms to do with monarchy and stuff like that, Old Norse speakers were probably working, in the landscape, working on the farms and things like that. And you get the same impression from toponymy, because you have Old Norse, very clearly Old Norse place names in extreme close proximity to Old English place names. And in an upland farming economy like that, presuming that it wasn't significantly different to how it was today, just because of, the land causing certain restrictions and limitations and things, people would have had to have been working in proximity to other people. So they would have had to keep an eye out for each other's sheep. They would have had to graze their sheep on the same upland and probably interact to discuss how that upland was going to be managed. And if these communities that have named their places in Old Norse and named their places in Old English are that close together, they must have interacted on a day-to-day basis. So I think you can make statements like that, although then again they're hard to verify unless you find an archaeological site which shows that. So I think you can probably read a lot into it, and I do read a lot into it, but then it's hard to then verify.
Yeah, I mean, like yourself, I read a lot into stuff, but I also recognise that, that old academic rigour requirement that you can't project. I mean, as a historian, the worst thing you can do is project your values today on the values of the past.
Yeah,
so you've got to always be prepared to be very self-critical. And whilst it's nice to think about it, as an occupation, I think the value of thinking in this way is that it might open up new avenues of interpretation when you come across evidence. You might look at evidence and say, now I can see how this could fit into the way I was thinking there. Now, being careful not to place the artifact into your theory, if you like, but then opening up and saying, is there any way we can check or verify this idea?
Absolutely.
And it works with the artifact. But I think they're useful thought experiments for opening up the mind to trying to understand how interpretations can be developed. How does that sound?
I think that sounds very good indeed. Well, that's the value of ethnographic study, isn't it? Of anthropological study of other cultures, because then we get a sense of how different human thought can be from place to place, from environment to environment, as you say. Because otherwise we don't think of how broad the range of experience can be and the range of thought can be.
I am sure that both Simon and I hope that you enjoyed the ideas we started to explore here. The point of Mythologies as a media cast is not to create polarised opinions and views, but to create opportunities for imaginative and creative thought. What I'm about to say is my own opinion solely. The importance of the issue of place names and how we mythologise them may appear to some as a very dry and dusty debate. It is not. The importance behind what Simon, the archaeologist, and Jack, the mythographologist, is saying is the foundation of the issues of our time now. There was a time in our whitefella society when we were a community of the land, a society embedded in the landscape and a culture which saw spirits in waters, rocks and caves. This is not just a whitefella history, this is the history of all humanity. We lost or moved away from our connection with the land, a subject we will take up in future Mythologies media casts, and in a memoryless madness, we entered other landscapes in search of resources and slaughtered indigenous peoples. We did not recognise their humanity. We failed our own humanity. We are still failing. The Amazon today is no different to Australia 240 years ago, and right at this moment, the depletion of the Arctic ice is placing surviving indigenous communities vulnerable to our whitefella exploitation of resources. Perhaps we think this has nothing to do with us, but all of our white fella culture, all of our goods, all of our wealth, all of our personal security rests upon the exploitation of others. Our mythologies protect us from realising this truth. We need to remember who we are. We need to remember our humanity. We need to remember why places have names and what the words we speak from our mouths actually mean. We need to do this so that we can grow and mature. We need to stop slaughtering each other. We need to do this so we can create a new mythology which includes everyone in a world which is shared and respected. Welcome to Mythologies by Jack Adams. Welcome to a space where you can put forward ideas, challenge what is said, and talk freely. If you have a view, then please express it respectfully.